English spelling is terrible.
You all know that already. Well done.
English spelling is tricky because it's often mingled with other languages. It has adopted a lot of words from other languages to make a gigantic, jumbled mess of spelling.
Sometimes in English's history, you have conquerors that came and the rulers spoke a different language than the common people. So they had to adopt words in order to communicate. Sometimes it was scholars that decided it didn't sound scholarly enough, so they changed our spelling system to be more Latin-like or Greek-like. And then sometimes we just needed a word for something, a foreign word for something that didn't exist in the areas where we spoke English. So like jungle, we just adopted it straight up. So yeah, we commandeer a lot of words and it makes English confusing and our spelling system is confusing. Sometimes we anglicize and make that spelling somewhat seem like it works, but it really doesn't.
So what can you do? As an English language learner, what can you do in the midst of this sea of awful spellings? What can you do?
What's up, guys? Welcome to WaiGuo Friends English. I want to start this video with a note. Not every English speaker is good at spelling.
I'm not. I'm not.
He's not.
I'm not terribly good at spelling. I am above average because my job has required me to do so. I do not like spelling. Spelling is awful.
In America and in English-speaking countries, we have spelling bees, we have competitions for spelling because it's tricky. Even British and American English spelling systems are different because America wanted to be different than the British, so we changed our spelling system in the 1800s. Thank you, Noah Webster, very much for that. Our system is not based on phonics. That's the main thing to get. It was literally up to whoever was working on the spelling system at the time to what looked right. And whatever looked right really depended on the time they were in, what their goals were, whether they wanted English to look scholarly or not. Like, it's a mess.
We also have words that are spelled the same. They're spelled exactly the same, but they're actually pronounced differently. So we have all sorts of mix-up with heteronyms and heterographs and all these weird things that happen. It's so confusing. We actually did a video on some really common heteronyms that you can find right here.
We also have words that are spelled similarly, but pronounced differently, especially in the vowels. Like the OU in through, though, rough, soup, flour, allowed, young, and wood. Those are all OUs, and we pronounce them strangely and differently. Yeah, good luck.
I'm so sorry.
Yes. We have a very messed up system, and it is very difficult for English speakers. Just so you know, it is difficult, and we spend a tremendous amount of time in our education system working on spelling.
When you take a quick look at it, there's a reason why we have spelling competitions. With words like baloney, kernel, fuchsia, bouquet, embarrass, conscientious, accommodate, minuscule, asthma? You can look at this list and join us in scratching our heads because when it comes down to it, these words are awful. A spelling is awful, but there are some things that you can do in order to help you progress to where you're making at least fewer spelling mistakes.
One thing you could do is you could learn the word's etymology. Every word has a story of how it came into English, how we changed it if we did, and why we pronounce it the way we do in some ways versus others. And some of these stories are really fun. This is what makes linguistics fun. That's what kind of got us hooked into it, was taking classes in university that really shocked us with how these word stories happen. It was really cool to unpack. We really loved it. So this is one of those things. It is complicated, it is tricky, it does take time. But if there is a particular word that you have to use often in your workplace or that you just need to use often and you really want to remember it, maybe it's worth the effort to look up its etymology and see where it came from and why it is the way it is nowadays.
And you can even hear this in a spelling bee if you've ever watched one. One of the questions that a person is allowed to ask is, where does this word come from? What language does it originate from? Because if it's in French, it's going to require different spelling rules than if it comes from Arabic. Mm-hmm. And so for you to be able to kind of dip your toes into that a little bit, don't go full sail into it. No. You will get lost in the weeds, but do a little bit of research. It'll help you kind of get the spelling and get a feel for, this is generally speaking how French makes its joie sound that we can then use whenever we hear a je sound in English. Another one you can use is sign language. We've done a video on this channel before talking about the usefulness of sign language, and that's because it just incorporates other parts of your brain and your body to kind of connect them to figure out a better way to spell it or figure out a better way to remember how to spell it. So this is about spelling out the letters. So that means using the alphabet, the sign language alphabet, in order to spell out the words that you're trying to spell. This is less about like the I have to remember how to spell this and more of how can I get this stuck in my brain about how to spell this word.
The next one is use mnemonics. Mnemonics are things that we do, little things that we do to help our brain make stronger connections. And usually it's just helping you get different perspective on how to remember a word or different meanings of a word, but we can also use it with spelling. You can do things like pronounce words in a funny way, like the way that it's actually spelled, like baloney. We often as kids say bologna, so that we can remember to say bologna instead of bologna. Asthma could be asthma. Try to say it with a bit of a lisp. There's a lot of different things that you can do. You can spell out to yourself. You can break the word into mini words. Like, for example, conscience, you can remember as conscience. It's an easier way to remember. There's an SC there, especially if you're pretty comfortable spelling science. So you can make it into an acronym where you give like different words to attach in a certain order so you can remember the letters at the top. Sometimes people make a mnemonic in their mind by how the word is formed. They break it up into parts and they see it as like a roller coaster. So they know there's going to be short letter, tall letter, short, tall, short, tall. Some people are like that. Really, it's whatever works for you. Whatever you can come up with to remember the way this word is spelled or what this word means. Mnemonics are super helpful in language learning.
Another thing that you can do, which would be a challenge, but a very welcome challenge, is if you take some tricky words and try to write a story or a poem using these. Just like we mentioned the OU spelling earlier in this video, you could take some tricky words and try to find a way to incorporate them into their own story by themselves or with other tricky words. What this does is it just gives you repetition and practice, and if you can do it clever enough, you could even pair them with other words from the original language. So if you're writing a story, maybe you're trying to incorporate as many English words that come from French into this story so that then you can kind of get used to spelling these French-inspired words.
Or if you really like writing creatively, you can take your whole story and base it off of a pun. Pick a mnemonic, like a pun mnemonic, or you could do wordplay and just play with it like that. And if this is something, if you really like this kind of thing, that works great. If you hate this kind of thing, don't bother. Another one, and this is one that we all know, you can find plenty of free software online to practice your spelling. And what's really helpful is not just the flashcards. For some people, flashcards work like magic. For some people, they really don't help because you forget very quickly. So one of the things you could do is find a flashcard system like Quizlet where you can play games with your flashcards. And there's spelling games on there, there's spelling tests on there, there's all kinds of things you can do with it. And Quizlet doesn't cost too awful much per year, especially if you get the yearly subscription. So whatever words that are common, if you're trying to pass the TOEFL, you really need spelling for a lot of intermediate and high intermediate words. If you are trying to pass the IELTS, again, it would be very helpful to have that spelling. If you just come across these words that you keep misspelling all the time and you really just want to conquer them, using something like Quizlet would be very helpful.
Fact is, a real question that you have to ask yourself is, how deeply do you need to spell correctly? Because there's a lot of spell checkers out there that either they come on your computer or your phone or your tablets or whatever it is, some that are just naturally built into a lot of the software that we use, like Gmail or Word Doc or AI. A lot of them, you don't need to spell the word correctly. They can kind of guess. When you do a search on a search engine, they can guess what you're trying to say, even if you're one or two letters off. So the question is, how often do you really need to spell words perfectly correctly?
Honestly, that's up to you. For some of us, we have jobs that require us to have good spelling skills. So things like if you're a teacher or a tutor, or if you're a writer, an editor, a proofreader, if you are a secretary, or you take a lot of notes in meetings and people use your notes to remember the main points in the meeting, you kind of need to have some spelling skills there. If you're a journalist, again, it would be helpful to have those skills in writing so that you don't come back to your notes and say, I don't know what I was writing, or you're the only one who can interpret them because it only makes sense to you. If you're a test taker, you kind of need the spelling skills in order to pass the test. So whatever it is, for some people, they really need those spelling skills. And I would argue that probably up through intermediate words, you should be fairly flexible with spelling in those cases, if you're in those situations. Do you need to know how to spell kernel? I mean, it depends on how often you have to use the word kernel or write the word kernel. So no, Yeah, no, not really. It's good if you hear it, but again, if you're reading a book because you like reading and you come across the word colonel and you have no idea what colonel is, that could be confusing too. So it's helpful to know so that you can read without having to look things up all the time, but it's also helpful to know so you don't misspeak if you're a speaker and you're reading off of a text, but it's also helpful in tests and being just a general writer person.
The reason why we did this video today is obviously to help you guys, to give you some tips, but also it's because it's just to show you that even native speakers, we do things differently. So for Amber, she read a lot of books growing up. For her, a lot of her spelling is significantly better than mine, but sometimes her pronunciation gets a little wacky, just a little bit. For me, I'm the exact opposite. I was more of an oral learner, so I would hear things that my teacher said, and then when they said, okay, write about Colonel whatever, this colonel in our American history, I would be like, I don't know how to write kernel other than a kernel of a corn kernel.
So there's a lot of different reasons to use this spelling system. There's a lot of reasons to learn it, but there's a lot of reasons to not learn it and to not make it a major focus of your English learning. So wherever you are at, I hope these 5 tips help you out. And yeah, if you like this video, let us know by liking it.
So good luck, and we'll catch you on the next one.